So let's begin together with the prayer. Master of all worlds, highest power, merciful compassion, your presence, source of strength to us,
as you have been
to our ancestors. What are we? What is our life? Therefore,
that you of all
that are
that are become barriers and your desire to prepare our hearts to feel for you. May you listen to these words of ours. May you open our this study was a pleasure before your throne of glory.
May you shower down
upon us the light of our souls
all the way May this
heart you the holy servants through whom you have revealed your word to the world shine and sparkle.
May their merit,
their ancestors' merit, and their Torah, their innocence and their holiness, and for us, we study in their merit, study as in the beginning of Israel. Open my eyes that I may gaze the wonder of God. May the words of my mouth and the thoughts of my heart be acceptable to you, for it is wisdom, it is from that knowledge and understanding issue forth.
Ananana, So we're back. We had a little break. I hope the break was okay for everybody. It was just occurring to me as here we are again, how amazing it is. I'm not exactly a big fan of technology, but it's amazing that here we are, this group of us, and we are joining together, we're praying together, we're singing together, we're about to study together, and we are thousands of miles apart from each other physically. That's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. So that we are together, despite the far, far flung distances between us, and it should make an impact a little bit on us. I think that we should recall that this is the power of what we're doing. The power of what we're doing is that it brings us together from, the old way of saying the four corners of the earth, over time and space. So we are very, very blessed to be able to be together. I feel that way. So I want to say that. We left off at the end of a discussion about Jacob's relationship with Esav. And the truth is, I actually don't remember if we actually got to the break at 275. So somebody actually has a clear recollection of the exact place we stopped. You can bring that up. But what I'm going to basically assume is that we got the basic point, that it's a difficult point that the Zohar makes on 274, and a very challenging idea, which is that Jacob, in order to get the upper hand over Esav, with Jacob representing all that is good in the divine presence in the world, and Esav representing the force of evil. In order to get the upper hand over Esav, Jacob ends up acting just like Esav, right? Jacob ends up having to fight Esav with his own medicine. So we had various variations and ramifications of that discussed in this whole section. So just to review a little bit, I want to start from the very last paragraph of this section, where it's from Rabbi Yehuda said on 274, and we can start reading from there. And I invite somebody to be our reader for this evening, please? Beryl, thank you. So you see it, the last 3 lines on 274. Rabbi Yehuda said.
Yeah, I was just trying to get unmuted because I think it would be more useful. Rabbi Yehuda said, with Laban too, this was fitting, for he was a sorcerer, as is written. I have augured that Yud-He Vav-He has blessed me, even though Jacob was called a consummate man. He was a complete, precisely so.
He was complete.
Precisely so, dealing appropriately with whoever deserved compassion, dealing appropriately with whoever deserved harsh judgment and tortuousness. For he comprised 2 components, and of him is written, with the kind, deal kindly, with the crooked, deal tortuously, with the kind, on the side of Hesed, kindness, with the crooked, on the side of Dina.
Kashya.
Kashya. Harsh judgment, all fittingly.
Right. So Rabbi Yehuda brings up another case. Not only was it with Esav that Jacob had to act in a shrewd manner and a seemingly underhanded manner, but with Lavan as well. After he runs away from Esav, he runs from Esav and he lands up in the clutches of Lavan. And Lavan is also an arch, bad guy. So how did Jacob deal with him? He had to deal with Lavan in a similar fashion, where he couldn't be simply all nice and sweet and wonderful, but he had to outsmart Lavan at his own game. So this is Rabbi Yehuda's addition. And then what we have at the end of this paragraph is finally giving us the image of Yaakov as the perfect, the complete persona, and the word shalem, complete, perfect, is used to describe Jacob after he wrestles with the mysterious angel figure, and he gets injured in his thigh, and he limps. And then right after that it says, Vayavo Yaakov Shalem Shechema, that Jacob went whole, perfect, in one piece toward Shechem. And then of course we have the terrible story about Shechem. But there we have this description that the Torah tells us that Yaakov is Shalem. Yaakov is complete, or all of one piece, all in perfectly good shape. From the word shalom, the word shalem means full, complete, nothing missing. So what is this completeness of Yaakov? For the Zohar, the completeness of Yaakov is that he takes both from his grandfather's quality of chesed, and he takes his father's quality of din, vura, and he is able to mix the 2 of them together without losing the quality of each of them, but is able to harmonize them. And now what the Zohar says is, and therefore his responsiveness in the world is fuller. He's able to be more complete because he's not one-dimensional. He's multi-dimensional. He has the capacity for chesed that he inherited from Abraham, and he has the capacity for din, for judgment, for harshness that he inherited from Yitzchak. And that's what made him the perfect combatant with Esav, with the forces of evil, and the perfect then progenitor of Israel. Right? So he becomes the one who is able to finally have the 12 children that will become the collective of Israel, Knesset Yisrael, to bring forth God's plan, the Torah, into the world itself. So this is the way the Zohar tries to harmonize and make peace by saying that Jacob is that harmonizing figure. And sometimes you have to play hardball with the people that play hardball, and you play softball with the people that play softball. And you have to be able to do both. All right. Any comments on this part so far? All right. Then we continue. I just a spoiler alert. We've talked about this many times. The Zohar is not one continuous worked out argument where every page builds on the previous page and everything that the Zohar says is based on whatever propositions it said before. Somebody not too long ago mentioned to me Spinoza. This is completely anti-Spinozist. Spinoza had a dream of creating a rock-solid system of thought, a vision of the world, where everything was completely locked together perfectly. The Zohar does not do that. The Zohar contradicts itself. The Zohar brings other aspects in that are challenging and that challenge its own perspectives from different angles, and go do something to it. If it contradicts itself, so it contradicts itself. That's it encompasses multitudes. So that's we should keep that in mind as we go into the next section, because the next section is not going to fit perfectly with what we just learned. Right, Craig, you're making knowing faces here.
Yeah, I'm just saying there goes the 10 years we've been studying together. It's all gone.
Right. So what do you mean? The 10 years we've been studying, we've been zigging and zagging and going up and down and sideways all the time.
Right.
All the time. Okay. So good. All right. So Beryl, now we have the next section. The next section works on a verse. It's in the side there. It's cited in partially at the indentation, but then on 132 we have the full continuation. So we start with the citation of the verse from the upside of the text in the middle of the page, and then let's go to 132 to continue it. You got it?
There was a famine in the land. The verse continues, besides the earlier famine that had occurred in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar. Okay, so as is its wont, the Zohar is moving section by section through the Torah portion, and we have talked about, just like the Torah has focused on the birth and the contentiousness of Jacob and Esav. Now we go back for a little bit of time, and we focus not on Jacob and Esav, we focus on Yitzchak again. Yitzchak, and of course with Rivka also. So the focus becomes shifted, and the story in the Torah tells us that Yitzchak and his family with Rivka are forced to be climate refugees, to use a kind of a word that might be used today. There's a famine in the land, and when there's a famine in the land, you go where you can find food. And people today who are angry at other people for doing that, who consider themselves faithful to the Bible, should just take a good look at the stories that we have here. And the Torah tells us quite explicitly, this happened with Abraham, and it happened with Isaac. And how much more should we take this to heart, when after all they were told by God to live in this land? It's all theirs. And yet Abraham leaves the land as soon as he gets there. Practically, he leaves the land and he goes to Egypt because he has nothing to eat. And Isaac is now doing the same thing. Isaac's plan is to go down to Egypt, and then God says, no, I have a different plan for you. You're going to have to leave where you are, but you'll be able to survive if you go to Philistine territory rather than to Egypt.
So he still becomes an immigrant to a foreign territory because he's forced to, because he has nothing to eat. And we should understand that if we don't like it when that Jacob doesn't live up to our standards of behavior that we had before, if we think that we're so righteous and compassionate, then that means that we need to be righteous and compassionate to the people that are being oppressed and tortured at our own borders as I speak. Okay, so the famine is there, and the Torah tells us, no, don't make the mistake that the Torah is confused and we're just retelling Abraham's story. No, this is Isaac's story too. And now we go. Rabbi Yehuda.
Rabbi Yehuda opened. Yud He Vav He tests the righteous, but the wicked and one who loves violence, his soul hates. How
Okay, so the verse says there's two different ways. There are two kinds of people. You know the famous joke that there are two kinds of people in the world. The people that think that there are two kinds of people in the world, and the people that don't think that there are two kinds of people in the world. So that's the way we can divide up the world. So for the Zohar, there are two kinds of people in the world, right? There's the good people and the bad people. So what is God's relationship? How does God interact with the good people? How does God interact with the wicked people? So the answer is that it doesn't say, as we often have, God rewards the righteous and God punishes the wicked. Here we have a more difficult statement. God tests, Yivchan. God puts the righteous to a test. God examines the righteous, but God hates the wicked, and God hates those who love violence. Okay, so this is a challenging verse. Okay, what are we going to do with it? Go ahead.
His soul hates. How perfectly arranged are the deeds of the Blessed Holy One. Whatever he does is based entirely on justice and truth, as is written, the rock, his work is perfect.
Okay, this comes from the end of Deuteronomy, Atzur Tamim Pa'alo, and this is the key phrase that is used as what's called Tziduk Hadin, accepting, justifying whatever the sentence is that we are subjected to. This is the phrase that's used to describe what we do at the end of our life, to accept whatever the judgment is. If this is God's decision that we should die, part of our vidui, part of our confession is to accept that this is just. The people that are the mourners for somebody who passes away, at the funeral, at the burial, this is a traditional phrase that we accept it. It seems to be sad, painful, tragic, wrong. Nevertheless, we say ultimately maybe we can't understand it, but we want to affirm that this is all right. This is completely correct. So God's work is perfect. Let's remember, and let's keep this in our minds. This is the kind of word that has been used for Jacob, right? Jacob is ish tam. The same word here, tamim pa'alo. Everything that God does is tam, is perfect. The word shalem, of course, is a different word, but it's all part of the same array of concerns. So Rabbi Yehuda is celebrating that everything that God does, no matter what, is all wonderful and based on justice and truth. Okay, come and see.
Come and see, the Blessed Holy One did not judge Adam until he had commanded him for his own good, so that his heart and will would not stray on an alien path, so that he would not be defiled. But he wasn't careful and violated his master's command, after which he imposed punishment upon him. Nevertheless, he did not punish him as he deserved, postponing his anger so he endured for a day, which is 1,000 years, except for those 70 he gave to David, who had none at all of his own.
Okay, so this is a dense paragraph. It's got a lot of different pieces to it. So I think we should take in, first of all, the kind of gentle way that Rabbi Yehuda is speaking. He's trying to persuade himself, maybe, that everything actually is not necessarily about punishment and judgment in the strictest sense, but that all of this is tempered with a lot of compassion and mercy and love. So he says, look, the Blessed Holy One did not judge Adam until he had commanded him for his own good. So there's a number of things here that are being said. He didn't judge Adam until he had commanded him for his own good. If you look at the note, you can look at 134.
Until he had commanded him for his own good, not to eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
Okay, so this is, we know this, right? This is, we know this story backwards and forwards. So God commands Adam and Eve not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So we have here a characterization of that command, that command is not arbitrary, it's not God on a power trip, but it's actually a command that was given to Adam for his own good. So it would be better for Adam not to know about good and evil. Right? So let's just hold that a little bit for a while. But what we have here that's also interesting is that Rabbi Yehuda says, and God doesn't judge Adam and Eve in the story until after this commandment is given. Right? So now what does that exactly mean? I mean, because what's the basis of any, before the commandment is given, there's no basis for a judgment, is there? What actually does it mean that he doesn't judge Adam? This is, for Rabbi Yehuda, this is like a mark of great generosity on the part of God. This is a great gift that God has given to Adam, that he forbears judging Adam until after he gives him a gift for his own good. He gives him an instruction, a commandment, and it's only after he gives him that commandment that then he starts judging, will Adam follow or not? And of course, as we then say, we know that he fails, so that his heart and will would not stray on an alien path, so that he would not be defiled. So this seems to be talking about what the command was. Or is it not that? Is it that God's forbearance of judgment is so important here, because if God would have applied judgment to Adam, then his heart and will would have strayed on an alien path. It's these, right? Two different ways of understanding this. One is it's for his own good that God gives him this command, because if he wouldn't have given his command, then he would have eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and then he would have gotten himself in trouble. Now, let's understand this carefully. If God hadn't commanded him not to eat, there would be no transgression per se in the eating. So it's not the eating that's the big issue. There's this good and evil that is out there for the taking, so to speak. And had God not commanded Adam and Eve not to take from the tree, they nevertheless then, because the tree was available, they would have eaten from the tree. And then they would have strayed, right? Because they would have tasted the fruit that has the knowledge of evil in it. So what does God do? God commands them not to, with the hope that then they won't. But at the same time, that command puts up now the grounds for judging Adam and Eve. But it's not the same grounds of judging as before. What if there were no grounds to judge, right? The Holy One did not judge Adam until he had commanded him. So he doesn't judge him. And he hasn't commanded him yet. Let's imagine that we're in that space, that nanosecond of time in creation, before this command has. So the possibility of Adam straying and choosing evil already exists. It already exists before the command that is transgressed happens. What doesn't exist is judgment. What doesn't exist is God's expectation to live up to a standard, right? To obey the command, because no command has happened yet. So God has no expectation, no demand. Literally, there's no command, there's no demand for Adam one way or the other. And Adam could have slipped into evil blamelessly. It wouldn't be his fault. There would be nothing stopping him. The tree is right there. It's delicious. It looks great. So had Adam fallen into that evil path before God's command, there would be nothing to say about it. There would be nothing to do. And yet at the same time, paradoxically, the judgment of good versus evil exists on that ontological level, on the level of reality, of true being. And Adam could have fallen into that evil. So what does God do to prevent that? God commands Adam, don't go there. Now, when Adam fails that test, or when Adam transgresses that command, his transgression is no longer a transgression of falling into the pit of evil. It's a transgression of God's command, which is not the same. It's not the same thing. All of us transgress God's commands all the time. That's what part of being human is about. And that doesn't make us evil. So the reality of evil per se, which is what we've been struggling with since the first page of is here again. It's brought up as being something that's not quite the same thing. It's not the same thing as simply just disobeying God. And in fact, the creation of a system that makes disobeying God possible is, paradoxically enough, actually a gift. It's actually a redemptive strategy by God to save us from sinking into irrevocable evil, which would have been absolutely the natural result of Adam walking around in the garden where the evil was, and coming in contact with it and tasting of it. This is pretty mind-boggling. So I put it out there, and if there are things that need to be refined or challenged, then let's hear it.
Rabbi?
Yes, Mark, yeah.
I wonder about the phraseology. Why is it knowledge of good and evil as opposed to good and evil? What's the purpose of having the intentionality of knowledge as opposed to the ontology of there being possibility of good and evil?
Right. So I wanna just a little bit caution us we use the word knowledge of good and evil. That's the standard translation. The words in Hebrew are eitz hada'at tovara, and the word da'at, which we translate as knowledge, is not simply cognitive. It's not simply intellectual. It's not an epistemological category. It's a life category. Da'at is used for the communion, the sexual communion of two human beings. That's when Adam knows Eve, that's the word that's used. So it's knowing, when we sometimes, biblically knowing, that's what we're saying. The Bible uses the word to know in a much, I don't know how to distinguish it, but it's not about knowledge the way we use it conventionally right now. So Anna, I think that takes away a little bit of the sharpness of your question.
Right.
What it means is actually intimacy with evil.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Whew. I said, I thank you for your compassion. Usually you give me a much harder time. So, all right. So let's keep going with this. So the setup that Rabbi Yehuda is giving us is I think not our usual way of thinking about this stuff. Certainly not mine. But it's meant to be, again, like I say, a celebration of God's ways, and specifically in the way God is going to deal with human beings who are, of course, notorious for being sinners. And here we have the first guy. So Adam wasn't careful; he violated the command. And now we have the result. What's the result? So God imposes punishment upon him. So God gets angry, of course, and Adam and Eve are expelled from the Garden of Eden, and that's where we are to this very day. So this day of Tisha B'Av, as it's concluding, a day of exile and suffering, the first, it's not Tisha B'Av, but the first exile and suffering is at the very beginning of history. Right, at the very beginning of the biblical story. So Adam and Eve are punished by God. Nevertheless, not the punishment that they deserved. So if you look at the note 135, right?
He did not punish him as he deserved. According to the divine threat, on the day you eat from it, you will surely die.
Okay, so the simple meaning of the biblical stories is pretty immediate results, right? The consequences of the sin will be immediately felt. Of course, as we continue to ponder the story over the ages, it becomes a question of this is the introduction of mortality. Or something like that, but the simple meaning is that day. That's it. You're a goner. I'm going to not withhold punishment at all. And yet, that's exactly what God does. So, what does God do? Postponing His anger. So He endured for a day. The very sentence that God said, "You're not going to live another day." Right? Instead, God says, I will let you live a day. I will let you live a day. And of course, based on the Psalm, 1,000 days, 1,000 years for you is like one passing day, from Psalms 90. So here, God gives Adam a whole day, completely in contradiction to God's threat, right? So the gift is of 1,000 years, and Adam is allowed to live 1,000 years. However, and this of course we've seen before, we know the story. Anybody that sees the genealogical stuff that the Torah has at the beginning, he only lives 930 years. He doesn't live 1,000 years. So this became a midrashic question: what happened to the other 70 years? And we've had this midrash related by the Zohar. We've encountered it earlier. The beautiful story that Adam is shown all of history by God, a whole array, like a zoom shot, with every single person included in the screen, and Adam sees that there's going to be King David, and King David doesn't have even one day to live. God has not allocated any time of living for King David, which of course is a paradox. We've talked about it. We're not going to talk about it now. So what does Adam do? Adam is overcome with compassion for King David, and Adam gives King David 70 years of his life. And we say in the Psalm also, Yemei shnotenu bahem shivim shana, him leguot shvanim shana. Right? Our standard lifespan is 70 years, and then if we're real starkers, it's 80 years. So 70 years is the standard human lifespan according to the psalmist. So that's what Adam does. Adam says, "Come on, Nebuch, give the guy a chance. Let him have a certain amount of time to be able to be King David." So this is the midrash, and the Zohar understands it on its terms. Just to summarize what you have a little bit in the notes, King David is the fourth wheel of the divine chariot, right? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the three wheels, and then we skip. I remember, people asked once somewhere back there, what about Joseph? What about Moses? These are people that are not as significant in the divine pleroma, right? The fullness of God's manifestation, the merkava, the complete basis of God's presence and weight in the world is the four wheels of a chariot, and the fourth wheel is King David. And he is also identified as Malchut, right? As royalty, as sovereignty, and that is Shechina. So Abraham is Chesed, and Yitzchak is Gevurah, and Yaakov is Tiferet, and then King David is Shechina. And Shechina would never have been able to exist in this world, according to this story, had Adam not given to King David those 70 years. What are the 70 years? 7 times 10. And the 7 sfirot that are the lower sfirot of the 10 sfirot are culminated in the 7th sfirah, which is Shechina. So Shechina absorbs each of the other energies of God, and each one is a microcosm or a fractal, so to speak, of the 10 sfirot themselves. Each sfirah is basically another reflection of all the other 10 sfirot. So each sfirah is 10. So in the end, you've got 7 times 10 is 70. So King David becomes endowed with the gift of life through Adam, through the first Adam. So Adam Kadmon, the earliest primordial Adam, gives Shechina that life. And what we have here is, again, a kind of an echo within the story of the gift of life twice over. Right? God gives Adam the gift of life, even though Adam doesn't deserve it. And then Adam gives Shechina the gift of life, which she was not given by God. Right? So Adam has to fill in that gap. And in a certain way, you could see that as Adam's redemption. Right? This is his paying back to God the gift of life that God gave him. Okay, Len, you wanted to say something? Okay. So anyway, what we have here again is that God tempers the judgment with love and generosity, with chesed and with life. Okay. So this is this paragraph. Okay. Now, similarly,
he does not punish a person in accordance with the evil deeds he constantly commits. For if so, the world could not endure. Rather, the Blessed Holy One postpones his anger for the righteous, and for the wicked even more than the righteous. For the wicked, so that they will turn back completely and endure in this world and in the world that is coming, as is written. As I live, declares Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, Elohim, I do not desire the death of the wicked, but that the wicked turn from his Vayaheya,
turn from his way, v'chaya, and live.
Turn from his way, v'chaya, and live in this world, and live in the world that is coming. That is why he always postpones his anger for them, or that a fine shoot will issue,
or so that
a fine shoot will issue from them into the world. As he generated Abraham from Terah, a fine shoot, stock and root, a fine share for the world.
Okay. So now we have this whole explanation. The righteous will be dealt with more extensively in the next paragraph. God is forbearing. God has Rahmanas. God has patience. So God is waiting to see what's going to happen. So God doesn't immediately zap people, which is what they, by rights should experience. Because if that's what would happen, then nobody would be able to live. The world will not be able to endure, because there is no such thing as a righteous person who does not sin. We all mess up, and if punishment was immediate and completely appropriate to the sin, then it would be total. Why? Because every sin, we don't care. We don't think that murder is the same thing as I don't know what, as not giving to a homeless person when they ask you for tzedakah. Right? Those are two very different levels of sinning. But if we talk about sin again as disobeying God, then every disobeying is a disobeying of God. So the punishment should be swift and full. But that wouldn't work, right? That's not going to happen. So instead, God waits to see what will keep on going, what will happen. And this is, of course, the possibility of tshuva, the possibility of repentance, the possibility of returning to the right path. The verse that we have here is Chayani nu Hashem Elokim, ki lo achpot b'mot hamet ki im b'shuvo midarko v'chaya. Right? This is a verse that we use in Ne'ilah more than once, and we also use it in Unatana Tokef. We say it, to God. We say you don't want. We say v'ad yom moto techakelo. You wait for a human being until the day that they die. Im yashuv, if he will repent, miyad tekablo. Right? Punishment is not immediate, but accepting the repentant is immediate. Miyad, immediately, you will accept them. Right? Im yashuv miyad tekablo. So this is essential to the whole message of the 10 days of tshuva, of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and the process that leads to it. So here is Rabbi Yehuda saying that this is God sitting and waiting and looking on, right? Hoping. This is God's hope. This is God's yearning, wishing for the person to turn around, so that God will be spared giving out the punishment and taking away this person's life. So then the verse that is quoted starts Chai Ani, right? So this is a language of taking an oath. As I live, we have here, right? The literally, I live, Chai Ani, right? The last word of the verse is Vechaya, right? It could have been Bachai, but it becomes expanded into Bachaya, and live. So the way that the Zohar reads that expanded version is living in this world and living in the coming world. Okay, look at 138, please.
And live in this world, in the world that is coming. The final two letters of the word v'chaya and live allude to the two worlds since. According to rabbinic tradition, this world was created by the letter He, and the world that is coming by the letter Yad.
Right. So that's why the B'chaya, if it would have just been B'chai, it would have been spelled with just a Yud. The Chaya, the extra He, is added so that you have a combination of the Yud and the He, the world that's coming along with this world. So to be able to live in this world and in the world to come. So this is the Zohar's reading of that verse, because God does not want to destroy. The word death here doesn't just mean death, right? The word death means partaking in God's life, right? We say v'yitzror b'tzrora chayim et nishmato. Take the soul of the deceased and bind it up into the bundle of life, right? So to die is to be detached from that bundle of life. So the bundle of life is first of all manifest in this world to a partial extent, and then the coming world is pure life, right? So unadulterated life, unmitigated and unmediated life. So this is what God desires for all of us. And as a result, God has to be very patient, because the possibility always exists that maybe the person will stop sinning or will redeem their sins. So, okay. And then we have another possibility. The other possibility is that if not the same person, if not that person redeeming themselves and becoming righteous, you never know who's going to descend from this person, right? If you cut this person off before they have a full life, you never know who will be either born from this person or influenced and taught by this person, who will encounter that person and actually be a completely different type of human being, and be a gift to the world. So of course Abraham is a gift to the world. What's the phrase that they use here? A fine share for the world, right? This beautiful gift that was bestowed to the world. Abraham comes out of Terach. Terach is, for the Zohar, not an admirable character. Terach is an idol worshiper. So Terach is a bad guy. How did it come out that Abraham comes out of Terach? So we've talked about this many times before. It's been noticed by the Zohar many times before. We talked about it a little bit again with Rivka, that Rivka was also special in that she lived in an environment with Lavan and with Betuel, who were awful people, and yet she is, an exemplar of Shekhinah. So the idea that the genealogy of good and evil is unpredictable. Esav comes out of Yaakov, Rivka comes out of Bethuel, right? The evil can still come out of the good, and the good, the righteous, can come out of the bad, out of the wicked. So therefore, God lets things play out. What I want to also highlight is, I mentioned that this section doesn't quite jibe with the previous section, right? We have with Esav and Yaakov a very, very stark dichotomy, right? Yaakov is the good guy, Esav is evil. But we have to, and there's no two ways about it. And Yaakov is in mortal combat with Esav. And Yaakov has to twist himself into a tortuous serpentine twisting and almost, contradict himself, or contradict the best that's within him in order to fight off Esav and subdue Esav. It's a fight to the death. And yet here we have this, I used the word already so many times, this forbearance, this patience, this gentleness that God can put up with bad people, that God can put up with the wicked, that God has high hopes for them. They themselves may become wonderful people, and they certainly have within them the potential to engender wonderful other people. So there's a I think a real, this is not smooth, the transition between the two of these two sections. How does it strike people here? What's the difference? How do we differentiate between that previous section and this one? How can we acknowledge the difference but not see them as just being totally incompatible?
But earlier, there was already some kind of contradiction, because
say it again. You broke up a little bit. Say it again.
Earlier, there was another kind of contradiction, because there was a whole idea that people beget things that are consistent with their innerness.
Right.
But now their innerness becomes complicated. So I don't see that much of a contradiction, as long as you see that the tree is good and evil. That you cohabit with reality, which is the possibility of good and evil. So I don't see that strong a contradiction.
So let me try to make the contradiction felt a little more strongly. Why don't we have forbearance for Esav?
See, I'm always bothered by that, because in the Torah, there's tremendous forbearance for Esav.
Good, right. So so now would you acknowledge that we do have a contradiction then?
Only a contradiction with that last section's demonization of Esav.
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay, but
that's the question here. That's the question I'm asking. The question I'm asking is, if we just had this piece that we're in the middle of right now, we have a beautiful picture of a patient, forbearing God who has, understanding that we are imperfect creatures, that we're not going to always do the right thing, and we're going to be we're going to need a little help, a little support, sometimes a kind turning aside and not looking at us so closely. That's all part of the elements that we have in these paragraphs that we're reading. Right? What I'm saying is, that's a whole different way of talking than, and the words that the word that I would use, that it doesn't explain necessarily, but the thick battle of good and evil.
But in Eicha, what we just read last night, Jeremiah is absolutely clear that good and evil both come from God. It's right there.
That's right.
Not only that, but Adam, by translating life and creating the possibility of Shekhinah on this level, has to be part of the confrontation of good and evil within God. I'm not saying it right, but the fact that you have to fight good and evil is part of the consequence of the fight between good and evil is a consequence of evil being as real as good. But that doesn't make evil the same as good. That's all I can do.
Okay, so let's build on that a little bit. Let's remember that tricky moment right before God commands Adam. Right before God commands Adam, don't go near that tree. Don't get involved with that tree. Right? So there was that paradox where I said, the way I'm understanding what Rabbi Yehuda is saying, that what Rabbi Yehuda is saying is that had God not said that, there was a very present and immediate danger that Adam would have fallen into evil, because there would be nothing stopping him. There would be no command not to go over to that tree. So the acknowledgement that there is this reality of evil, as you pointed out also, and as we've said, so many times, there's an acknowledgement of the reality of evil, and it turns out that God, in creating the command not to touch that, not to eat that tree, not to eat that tree, that's God's first fight against evil. Right? That is already God battling evil. But that battle is primordial. Right? That battle is before that first second of God's interaction with human beings and saying, don't do that. So that's the distinction that I'm struggling with, and I want to just point it out. It's a contradictory distinction, but it is a distinction. There's the life struggle of good and evil as we humanly live it, and then there's this deep, essential, prior conflict between good and evil. And what we've been saying, and what the Zohar, shockingly says is, and that primal fight is within God per se. And that's why the whole section about Yaakov and Esav, the way the Zohar talks about it, is not the biblical way of talking about it. The biblical way, that's what I was talking about, we had this discussion back and forth. When are Jacob and Esav people? And when are Jacob and Esav these mythic essences that that represent, or that are, God in goodness and God in, how to say such a thing, how can we even say it, in evil, absolute evil. And that's the tricky dance that we're doing here, right? We're going back and forth between recognizing that evil is not simply, hey, we're flawed creatures. We don't work perfectly, so we end up slipping up. Right? The Zohar wants to say, no, there's such a thing as real evil. There's real evil, but that doesn't actually cover, what shall I say? To be generous, 98% of human life. The struggles that we have are struggles that God can be very patient with. And the failures that we have, and the messing up, and the wrong things that we do. But nevertheless, there is this real seed of evil that is refracted, in a dim blurry way by what we're doing, but which nevertheless really, really is. And every once in a while it comes to the surface. Every once in a while it really actually happens. So, I don't know that doesn't harmonize everything, but it brings up distinctions. Making those distinctions is, as a statement, I just made a distinction. But actually living out a consciousness of that distinction is very hard. And it's not, one second, and it's not, there's no clear pathway of dealing, of living with that knowledge of that distinction that I know of. Yeah, David.
I'd like to put a different view on this, less intellectual, less struggling. What I see here is an acknowledgement of the job of parents. And Adam, when he is young in the beginning, he's naive. He's a child. He doesn't know the difference between good and evil. And so he's susceptible to either. And so what is God's commandment? God's commandment is really teaching. It's Torah. It's a teaching. God commands him not to eat of that tree. And once he is taught by God, the parent figure, he's capable then to do either good or evil. The spin on eating of the tree is now between good and evil instead of between, as the child would be, between naive and instructed or educated. And that's my view of it. We are adults. We instruct our children. We deal with good and evil.
So I think that there's a lot of truth in what you're saying, and the idea of parenting. The word for a parent in Hebrew is horeh, right? And the plural is horim, and it's the same root as Torah, right? So Torah is guiding, pointing out, instructing, showing the way, and that's what the word parent is: the one who shows the way, the one who guides, and so on. So you're right. There's definitely, look, we talk about God as our parent, for sure. But let's take a sad situation. Let's take a situation of a child who gets no parenting or bad parenting, right? So what are they going to do? They end up doing whatever they do. So let's make it as bad as I can. They end up actually becoming a gang person, and they end up killing people.
Maybe he occupies the White House. I don't know.
Well, he's another story and a bad one for sure. But let's take your story. Let's take the person who ends up not getting parented and not getting instructed on good and evil. So the evil that they do, this is the circle that we get caught in. Are they doing evil when they don't know the difference between good and evil? So I think that the Zohar's answer is yes. It's possible for them to be doing evil, even though they're not responsible. Right? We won't hold, like we don't hold people that go crazy. They go crazy and they do something terrible. The thing that they do is terrible. Right? The harm that they do is terrible. The destruction that they wreak on the world or on another human being is terrible. But they're not necessarily responsible. So yes, as human beings, we live with, if we're healthy enough mentally and so on, we live with the burden of responsibility. That's where God's command comes in, right? That's where God's parental intervention comes in, and that's what I was saying before. Endowing us with the burden of responsibility is not the same thing. In a certain sense, it hopefully will save us from sinking into complete and utter evil. That's the Zohar's claim from before. Because otherwise we could be creatures who would be doing pure evil. And that's the Zohar's extra piece that is pushing us in an uncomfortable situation. We have to, that they're saying it's not just about, whether we want something or not want something, or whether we're used to something or not, or whether we, psychically aware of what we're doing. We can be not aware of what we're doing, and nevertheless, what we're doing can be totally evil. And that's not that comfortable a position in a modern liberal world. In a modern liberal world, everything is judged based on the individual's consciousness. And the Zohar says, no, there's such a thing as a realm of evil, which is evil. All right, I think we're going to stop here. And we'll be able, God willing, to continue next time, if God is patient enough with us. And we'll keep going.
Shakor. Thank you, Rabbi.
All right.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Night, everybody.
All right.